Yes, people, welcome to another episode of B.E.A.M. I'm your host, JR. Happy New Year to everyone. And we always say we've got a special guest, but this is different. This is family. This is someone I consider to be my big brother. Has been through hardship in his life and is doing some very positive things. Dwaine Patterson, welcome to B.E.A.M. How you doing, my brother?
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost is I would like to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to also tell my story. But first and foremost, I always like to start as well by saying Assalamu alaikum to my brothers and peace and universal love to the rest of humanity.
Yes, brother, man. Now, first of all, it's been a long time. We're gonna get into it. But 22 years was the time you spent in jail, which is a very, very long time. And my earliest memories of you, and I don't know if you remember this, right? But I think just before the McFlurry from McDonald's came out, yeah, and I must have went McDonald's and I got the Smarties McFlurry, and I see you. He's like, little bro, don't eat that. I was like, why? He's like, you eat, you get bumps on your face. I threw the McFlurry away. You started laughing at me, bro. So that's one of the earliest memories I have with you. But yeah, man, just to see you again is amazing, and good to see you're doing well, man. But let's talk about your life, man. Let's start with growing up in the Patterson household. How was it growing up in the Patterson household?
Yeah, as you know already, with families, there's always, you got the highs and you have the lows. There's like a roller coaster. But it was always eventful and it was always exciting as well because I have such a large family. So I have 5 brothers and 9 sisters.
Oh, big up your sisters as well.
And
man.
yeah, no, please, definitely. And also navigating between, obviously, my mother conceived me when she was very young. So she was 16, but she had me at 17. And obviously that my father was young as well. So they weren't actually officially together like that.
Right.
So it was just navigating between both of my grandparents' home at the time.
Yeah, man. And we'll talk about, it's interesting you say that. I mean, obviously where we're coming from, unfortunately the Bat family is not together, or in most cases, in most families, but we'll talk about that as we go through. Let's talk about a place that you and I know very, very well. That's Patmore Estate. Shouts out to everyone from Patmore Estate.
No, definitely, 100%.
What's your earliest memories of Patmore Estate?
My earliest memory of Patmore Estate is slightly different because I know that some of the viewers might be unaware of this. I originally come from Clapham Junction. So I was from actually 9 Badrick Court.
Yeah, Badrick.
And that was a whole different scenario. So it was like, yes, we had our little ups and downs as well as growing up with various different individuals, people that were involved with Soul Solid and so forth. But it was, I would say that it was still kind of like tongue in cheek. It was like, even when we had our little problems, we are still kind of family because all the family was actually kind of connected.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when I actually left, so Clapham Junction, and I actually went to Patmore, it was a whole different ball game because it was like Wandsworth Road. So you're talking about from like all the estates from going up from Vauxhall.
Hemans.
That's correct.
Wyville Estate, all of those estates.
All the way down to basically Clapham Junction.
Yeah.
And for some reason at that time as well, I saw Patmore. If you want to isolate Patmore as itself as well, initially I saw Patmore like Switzerland. So it was like a friendly place for most of the areas, like Stockwell, Brixton, all the other kind of neighbouring estates, but except for Clapham Junction. For some reason, there was some type of hostility towards Clapham Junction, and I never really understood that until later on in years when I actually spoken to a gentleman that was about 10 years my senior, and he basically said that in those times Junction was, and still was quite respected, and it obviously incurred a lot of individuals that were from different areas that were upset with. So I can understand that. So I felt like I got the backlash of that when I initially moved into Patmore. I was known as the, Clapham Junction kid. So, yeah, Patmore in itself, as what we said, was like Switzerland, but it was kind of divided. It was divided into like 4 parts. So you had like Dealey Road.
Yeah.
You had Kerry Gardens.
Yeah.
You had Savona.
Yeah.
And you had the bigger portion, which is Fessley Road.
Yeah.
Corunna Road, where I was actually from. And they all had their groups. But they were still all together because they'll play like football, football matches against each other. There was no kind of real hostility.
Yeah. And a lot of people are familiar with Patmore because shout out Lewis done his documentary and showed the different parts of Patmore. And I know Lewis is someone when you came home, you went to visit in the gym and had a conversation with him. What's your relationship with Lewis, Terry, and his dad? Shouts out to everyone. Like, how did you first meet them when you was growing up?
Yeah, they were my actual neighbors.
Yeah.
So I loved his father as well because his father was a man that had principles. He was always a man of integrity, and he was never an individual as well that would encourage anybody to do anything negative. He was always a kind of like a positive influence, and he would always encourage you to do the right thing. But he was also firm but fair as well. And he just seems like, I called him a real community leader because he actually protected Patmore as well. Facts. If there was any kind of like issues going on as well, he would actually resolve those issues. And he was just a nice and funny person to be with. It just felt like, more than being an elder, it was just like another friend. Now, obviously, with Lou and younger Terry, they were just like my little brothers. Yeah. And it's actually quite funny as well because when situations sometimes where people didn't really understand our dynamics, and I used to say that, yeah, my cousins just live over there. And they say, who? And so they would observe them and they'll be looking, and I know that it was baffling them because they'd be thinking, really, but he's actually Caucasian and you're Afro-Caribbean. What's going on here? Yeah. But they just didn't understand as well that the connection that we actually had as well. So yeah, it was very, inside each other's homes, always together. It was just one big family. It was nice. Have little William in between because there was a home in between. So, Nancy and Martin used to live in between us, and it was just nice. That landing was just beautiful.
Yeah, man. Big them up every time, man.
No, definitely, 100%.
Those that know you well know that boxing is something that you're very passionate about. I've always been passionate about since you're growing up. If I think back to my love of boxing now, it's probably off the back of growing up, seeing you fight. Obviously, my brother as well.
Yeah, he was better.
Yeah,
I'll just put it out there. He was better.
But one of my earliest memories of you boxing, like you and my brother going boxing together, Elsfield ABC, Amateur Boxing Club.
That's correct, yes.
When was the first time you stepped into Elsfield?
It was... So when I came, when I was actually released from my first sentence of incarceration at the age of 18, there was a prison guard that recommended that I should actually do boxing because he understood that unfortunately I developed an appetite for blood. I was young. I was suffering with, many types of insecurities. So at first, I think he recommended for me Repton. But I thought that it was just too far away. So done the research and I realized that there was a club, Elsfield. It's actually funny that you mentioned this because as soon as I stepped in, I saw Sid and so forth and I spoke to them. I was ready, I was looking at the boxers and I was just like, I'm ready to go in. I just wanna fight. I don't care. They're like, look, listen, you need to learn the art first. I'm just like, look, I'm ready. I just want to go in there.
Just go and scrap straight.
So after about, no word of a lie, after about a couple of weeks, they said, okay, you can go to spar. So there was a gentleman there. He was a good boxer. He looked very impressive. And they said, yeah, he can take you around, And I think I shocked them because I actually put him under pressure. I'm not saying that I won, but I put him under pressure for somebody who just didn't know anything about boxing at that time. And I think after that, and this is where your brother comes into it, after that he came across and he gave me a spot, he was like, raw, you know, like, you're actually good. Like, you got a stiff right hand. And like, most people knew me for that. But the funniest memory was, especially on regards to boxing as well, because, you know, me and your brother, we traveled up and down the country. We done very well. You know, your brother was more technical. Richie Rich was this. I'm surprised that he could have been a world champion. No, seriously. He was, we used to call this as well, we used to call it sexy boxing. That's what he used to do. He just looked all neat and everything. I was more the crowd pleaser. You know, it's either I'm going to get hurt or the person gets hurt. It was just one of those, like, it was nice. But I'll never forget. And there used to be some travelers that used to come to our gym as well. And I like to thank them as well, Johnny and his son Dean and so forth. And he was very good. He was like a bare knuckle fighter. And I'll never forget this. I stepped in. I saw this guy in the ring, like he's a shadow boxing. We locked eyes. And he says, "You want to spar?" You know, me being cocky, I'm thinking like, nah, you know, I know, yeah, he's a bit older and so forth, but I'm strong. Nobody can, you know, I've got a serious right hand on me. And that's what I'm just thinking. I'm thinking, you know, who's this guy? But this is why I always say as well, and I say this to the viewers as well, that you need to sometimes observe your surroundings as well. And you need to make an assessment before you sometimes rush into certain situations. Because what should have dawned to me was that why ain't nobody going in the ring with him? But I didn't actually do that. So I said, yeah. But I looked over to your brother, and your brother's like shaking his head like he's like, I don't know what that means though. Like, people are like, no. I got into the ring and he said, yeah, let's spar. So he's come forward, I gave him a punch. I can see that he's felt, okay, you can punch. He went, good punch. After that, the rest was history. He punched me from one end to the other end, to the other end, to the other end. That's when I realized that, wait, I got set up here. I said, this was too much. And it was like, everybody was just looking like, and it was just like, yeah, it was time. But my pride, but he annihilated me. He was the one that actually taught me hit a move. Because before, I just thought that nobody in my weight category or anybody could actually move me. He actually taught me that. Because how we just... and then from that point there, I just said to myself, okay. But yeah, it was nice. It was a nice community. We had lots of experiences. It was nice.
Oh man, big up Elswood ABC and fond memories indeed. No, I want to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned because I feel like that early part of your teenage years, you know, you mentioned that in your first incarceration. So if you want to explain to the viewers, like, because we talked about 22 years, but you was also incarcerated for 5 years during your teenage years.
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
What was the incident that led you to being incarcerated the first time?
Okay, so the incident that led me of being actually incarcerated the first time as well was I amputated another young child's finger. Obviously, on reflection now as an adult as well, it's quite alarming that how, you know, and we're seeing this across the country now as well, that young people are producing knives and they're actually injuring and damaging each other. And it's actually sad and it's actually frightening. Could I really justify this? No, I can't. All I can say at the time as well, especially with my immature mind, I just didn't like him. I didn't like his brother. And it was just I know that some people may not understand this in viewers, but it was like a rites of passage. And it was a form of also intimidation. So you would try to intimidate somebody. And that young person I intimidated, but it was far worse than this intimidation, because he actually lost half of his thumb. So yeah, so that incident, obviously, it weighs heavy on me now as an adult, and all I can actually do now to make a difference as well is become the person that I know that my family always wanted me to become, and what I know that I was capable of being. And that is actually helping other young people that are in situations, not even young, even old as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and no, that's one of the main reasons that we're here, man, because as much as we'll talk about the hardships, and just a trigger warning to anyone who may seem some of the details a bit triggering, apologies in advance, but you know, what we want to do is you know, use your story to really put some positive energy back into the community where we're from. And that's the main thing. Unfortunately, we have to talk about these details because I feel like it's important that people need to know the realities of life if they go down a certain path.
101%.
And I feel like someone like yourself, who else better to, you know, guide these people, guide these young kids, even, as you said, old adults, in terms of, you know, that life and what that means. But so, as we said, it's a positive thing that we're going to talk about, and we're using these stories to really sort of project some positive energy and just show the consequences.
Yeah, I would like to say to the young people as well, I understand that sometimes because it's difficult as well. Let's be honest, and we need to have an honest conversation, because what you're actually doing as well, sometimes we have all these kind of campaigns as well. You're telling these young people as well, lay down your arms, but you're not actually giving them a alternative reality. What's the alternative reality? What's the alternative? And this is where the difficulty lies. So the young person is actually listening to what we've got to say and say, you know what? I actually like what they've got to say. I want to actually make a change and a difference in my life. But if I put down my arms right now, I'm going to be vulnerable, because those that are around me, who are members of me, they're going to forsake me, and then my enemies are going to capitalize upon this. So what can we actually do in order to help these young people? Because there was, funny enough, I was in the car with my wife, and I didn't want to really sound like a cockatoo. You know, sometimes we do all these podcasts, you're all sounding the same, you're sounding very scripted and so forth. And I remember a book that I read, it was Chimp Paradox, and it referred to how to catch a monkey. So what they said was that with some hunters as well, that they would place a vase in the middle of the ground, and they'll put a stone just big enough so it can fit through the neck of the vase, and then they will sit and wait. So anyway, the monkey will come down and the monkey will see the stone and he'll put his hand, but the monkey's not understanding that because of the combination of the stone and the hand, it's impossible for the stone to be actually removed from the vase. But the monkey's stubborn, so it's not moving. And then what happens? The net comes over the monkey. So now the foolish monkey has thrown away its happiness and freedom over what? A worthless stone. So how do we relate this to? It's like these young people as well. They're not understanding the consequences of their actions as well. You're thinking that you're representing something. You're thinking that, yeah, this is what's going to give me respect, but you don't understand that you're throwing away your happiness and your freedom over something that is worthless. Because once you're actually incarcerated as well, all those people that are patting you on your back, all those people that are giving you accolades are the same people that are going to be, let me tell you, are going to be trying to hit onto your woman or your wife, are going to forsaken your family, are not going to be concerned about you. So this is the reality of the situation that we live in.
Yeah, and you know, being two things I want to say on that. There's the flip side to that as well, right? Because I'm sure in your situation, as you've moved through life, your teenage years and your adult life, unfortunately, the circumstances you're in is just, you need to be that person to survive. I was reading 50 Cent's book, and he was saying that, you know, where he's from, similar background, but just in America. But, you know, if you don't stand up for yourself, you become a victim.
100%.
And, you know, sometimes, I'm not condoning it, but sometimes you need to protect yourself. And otherwise you become a victim, and people will really take the piss out of you. But the unfortunate thing about that is that the environment that we're in forces us to be that person. And that's not, I don't think many people understand that in terms of the environment and the way that we're brought up. We have to be a certain way in order to survive. It's not something that we want to do, but we have to do sometimes.
100%. I can, but there's also, it's how you sometimes interpret an event as well. Because when you're young as well, you have high levels of testosterone. So sometimes, if you feel that, I know the young people, they actually call it a violation. So if they feel that, this person's violating them, then they're going to react in a certain way.
Sorry to cut you, bro. How many fights have happened off, what are you looking at?
That's correct.
How many fights have happened off the back of that? But yeah, go on.
And it's funny that you mentioned that as well, because I remember once there was an older man. He was like 10 years my senior. And this is whilst I was actually incarcerated. This was when I was in, I think it was Wormwood Scrubs. So I'm all puffed up. This guy is looking at me intently. So I was angry with him, and I was thinking, like, I got up and said, well, who are you looking at? Why'd you keep on looking at me? Who are you looking at? So he said something that made, from being like here to here, he says, how do you know that I'm looking at you if you're not looking at me? And everybody started to laugh. I felt so small.
Yeah.
And he said, but I will tell you the reasons why I was looking. He says, are you related to so-and-so? I said, yeah, that's my uncle. He said, that's why I was looking at you. So what I would actually say to young people as well, that before you make a judgment call, understand first what that person is trying to convey. That's one thing that we learn, especially in Islam as well. Examine what is said, not he who speaks it. And Albert Einstein, he said, condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. So know your facts first.
Definitely.
That's all I'm actually saying. I'm not here to preach. It's up to you, because one thing that my father said as well, and I would always repeat this in whatever type of podcast, whatever type of talk that I always give, one of the treasures that I held from my father was this. He said, it's not the mistakes that you have to worry about, but it's the consequences that come with the mistakes. And this is something. So if you're prepared, if you feel that you can live through those kind of consequences, who am I to tell you how you should live your life?
And people, I don't think people in that situation fully understand the consequences until they're actually in it. And you're someone who's been through those consequences and can just give some perspective on what it's really like, because I feel sometimes people feel like going to prison is like a glorified thing. It's nothing nice. I've never been to prison, but hearing your story, and it's not a place you want to be. And we'll talk about even the certain tactics they do in prison to really try and suppress not only your physical state, but your mental state as well.
101%.
We'll go into that. But we digressed a bit in terms of, 13 years old was the first time you was introduced into the prison system, into that sort of structure. What was your mind state like going as a 13-year-old for the first time going to prison? Like, how did you feel at that point?
My early memory was, I think by then I was quite hardened. And what I mean by hardened, and it's kind of sad, now reflecting back on it, was because when I was roughly about the age of, I think it was roughly about 12, I was already introduced to social services. So they basically placed me into children's homes, which I didn't feel that it was justified. Because, look, I can tell you the whole dynamics. I have, as what I said to you, I have 9 sisters and I have 5 brothers. Not one of them has ever been in trouble with the law. So it shows that it's not anything to do with my parents and the kind of upbringing. But I just felt at the time when the judge done this order as well, that he weren't taking into consideration the impact that it was actually going to have. And so I felt that the adults that had a duty of care was very cold. I felt that there was really nobody, especially we're talking about the early 90s here. So it weren't like how it is in today's society as well. They had a different type of philosophy and way of thinking. It was children are supposed to be seen but not heard. And I just felt that it was very aggressive. And some of the ill treatment that they would marry out as well. So for example as well, we know that young people have high levels of testosterone, but there should never be any kind of justification in you physically manhandling them, especially as an adult to a child. Nowadays we'll call that child abuse. But in those days it was just disciplining a very disruptive young person, which I just felt that it was totally unacceptable.
What levels of disciplining, as we've talked about, like, as are we talking like literally hitting with like batons, getting kicked, punched by officers?
So I would say, especially when I went into, because obviously when I was 13, so I went into secure units. So I'm talking about punching in the stomach. I'm talking about putting your arms, what we would probably in jiu-jitsu call a Americano, or, you know, yeah, bending back your wrists. The in jiu-jitsu terms we would call it knee on belly. So that means basically placing their knee onto your chest or your belly, restricting your breathing, and especially at that age, and obviously being so small. So there was a lot of, I would actually call it quite demonic and sadistic.
Definitely, man. And look, when you get into your most recent incarceration, there's a lot more that happened to you, which was even different. Worse. That we'll go on to discuss. But
100%.
I want to talk about one other point from your first incarceration, because at that point, religion's a big part of your life.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
So, firstly, maybe give the viewers an understanding of your religious background prior to that, and what triggered you to give yourself to Islam.
Okay, I've always had a combination in my family of different religious beliefs. So again, my father was a Rastafarian. He was a 12th tribe. My mother was Church of England. My father's grandparents, so my father's parents, which is my grandparents, they were Catholics. Then my grandfather became a Jehovah. Then my mum's side, both of them were Church of England.
Right.
So yeah, you could say the foundations was actually, Christianity and, the Bible and so forth. In regards to myself as well, it was, especially in those times as well, it was a big honor to be kind of like an altar boy. So I would hold the cross. I would read, passages from the Bible, like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. You'd go to sometimes old people's homes and give them some comfort in actually reading out passages. And that's how literally my life in growing up. But there was always, I don't know what it was, there was always questions that weren't being answered, if that makes sense.
And even at that young age, sorry to cut you off, you had the presence of mind to have an understanding that maybe what you've been taught wasn't quite Uragi.
For me, and I don't mean to offend those that do have that belief system, but this is just my journey. And I just felt that there were many gaps. And I felt that at that time, especially coming from our community as well, sometimes some of the elders, they don't like to sometimes answer questions that they themselves might not know. So it was just like, well, I've just told you and that's it. Where I wanted to really know more. So, yeah, so let's fast forward. So eventually I embraced Islam when I was 16. I was in Feltham. I had a very close friend. We called him Jamman. and he would, in his own kind of ways, he would articulate, his belief system. But I'd listen, and it made sense. Even though he felt that he weren't making sense, it made sense to me, a lot of concepts, and I just wanted to read up on it. I then was invited. I went to the mosque, and then the Imam, I heard the Imam talk, he gave his sermon, and after that I felt that this was the religion for me.
It's interesting as well, because we see a lot of young black people. I think there's for me, and it'd be good to get your understanding of the link between prison and religion, because as you said, prior to your incarceration, you wasn't of the Islamic faith, and then you met someone and decided to move forward and give your life to Islam. Why do you think so many brothers go into a situation where you're in prison and then convert into Islam? Can you give some insight into, why do you think that is?
So if we're going to talk about faith and recognizing our Lord, then that's a whole different ballgame. Sometimes when you're outside as well, you're distracted. So many times you have so many different things going on for you at that particular moment in time. But when you're in prison, you're stripped bare. So you've only got time to reflect and ponder. And I feel that that's the best opportunity, and people become close to God. And yeah, Islam appeals because why? In my personal opinion, because we believe that we have the truth. And what did Jesus actually say as well? When you find the truth shall set you free. So this is in our opinion. And it wasn't only that as well. I think with what appealed to me as well, because at first, you hear these kind of anti-Islamic sentiments, such as they don't respect Christians. Look, they don't respect Jesus. They don't respect Mary. And then when I'm reading the Quran, Jesus is mentioned more times than our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This can't be the religion that hates Jesus. Or they have a whole chapter based on Mary. So for me, this was an eye opener. So, one thing that I've always said as well, that I never wanted to allow myself to become ignorant.
And then just touching on that, one of the drivers behind you telling your story is you have so many brothers, man, that are currently incarcerated at this moment in time. And firstly, you say, big them up, keep healthy, free, make sure that, one day they'll be free for sure. But you're making them proud, first of all, man. So I just wanted to pick you up.
Thank you very much.
And I know that was one of your promises to them when you was released, that you would, make sure you represent them in a way that they'll be proud of. So big yourself up for that, man.
Yeah, I'd like to further elaborate on that as well. It's hard and it's heart-rendering as well. I left many good individuals that had the potential to be anything that they wanted to be. Seriously. I understand that, look, you point out the most perfect person, the person that hasn't made a mistake. And one of the things that I actually said to them, especially when I left solitary confinement, I know we're going to discuss that as well. And they said, Yusuf, don't forget us. And I promised them that I'll be a voice for the voiceless. But not only those that are incarcerated as well, those that are sometimes subjected to suppression, oppression, and depression. I would like to try to be a people's champion. It doesn't matter what race or what nationality, what religious beliefs. I honestly believe as well that we're all human beings and we all have, the right to live on this planet and to have respect for one another. And this is it again, even with Islam as well, it says this, that you cannot be a Muslim if your belly is full and your neighbors go hungry. And, for me, this was pinnacle for me. This was amazing for me, especially being in prison as well, that in prison, it's kind of a predatory environment. So you tend to only think about yourself. You don't really care about your fellow human being. But when he says neighbors, you're just thinking the person next door to you. But it's not. In Islamic terms, it would be 40 doors to your right, 40 doors to your left, 40 doors in front of you, 40 doors behind you. It's a little village. So, you know, this is the magnitude of things. And so, yeah, it's very touching.